Hi peeps. Today's video we're going to be talking about journaling with daily draws. I get asked all the time about journaling, about my journaling practice. I probably have about 20 videos on the channel on this theme. But I recently fell down a rabbit hole in regards to being able to build the muscle of our attention span. I have a lot of clients, I'm in the middle of doing the year ahead readings. And I have a lot of clients who are looking to bring in a new level of practice and dedication to their spiritual path in 2025, who are wondering, how do I create a sustainable aspect of practice for myself around this? And while I was doing some research on ways that we can build that muscle, and I came across a wonderful video that I shared in an Instagram story. Many of you enjoyed it. I will do my best to post that video in the description box down below in case you are someone who's looking for some advice on that. But through that process, my son and I kind of rededicated ourselves to a daily reading practice together. We both have separate reading practices. Of course, he has to read for school, so he has a 5-day-a-week reading practice for that. I read regularly for work, but also I'm a very passionate and avid reader in my personal life as well. It's one of my favorite hobbies. But I wanted to get back to reading some of the classics. And so we've dedicated 30 minutes on the days when my son doesn't have basketball, drama club, or jazz band practice to sitting together and reading our own books, but dedicating some time to sitting and reading. And it made me think about all of that also. And so in addition to these things, the sitting and the reading that we've done together this week has also allowed me to reflect upon taking notes when it comes to journaling and daily draws, so that you can really be present to the daily draw and get the most out of it. And I had some good response on a daily pull video that I shared with my Patreon peeps over on Patreon. And so I thought here in the YouTube community, I would share things that I found helpful to do when it comes to documenting my daily draw, so that I'm not just writing out verbatim the guidebook meaning like a Wikipedia page for myself to reference back, even though I already have a guidebook. So why would I be doing that? I wanted to speak to how to create some really meaningful journaling sessions for yourself around your daily draws, and what I have found most helpful in that regard. So in this video, I'm going to speak to 2 different ways that you can do that. Now, if you are working with, so for instance, I took Pixel Occult had a Lenormand Oracle that I really wanted to create my own system with, and this journal is dedicated solely to that deck. So what I did, just so that you can see, is I took the card and I believe it had the titles, and then I added very short prompts for myself to get my intuition, to get the juices of my intuition flowing for when I pull that card. So I did kind of like a bullet point guidebook, a little white book for myself, if you will, for that particular Oracle deck. And then every time I draw from that personally for myself, I can reference this as my own system. So one of the ways that you can really get into connecting to a deck and remembering the card meanings for yourself is to write down your own associations in a bullet point form like this. So this is one of the ways that I wanted to share with you today, that you can actually connect with journaling in regards to your daily draw and getting some meat from it that you can carry with you that you're going to remember. So actually writing down your bullet point references for the card itself. This is really, really helpful. And it's nice if you're developing your own system. So this is something that I reference every time I work with that deck if I'm doing a daily draw, not if I'm using it in a client reading, but if I'm doing a daily draw for myself. Now I want to go to my regular journal. This is my daily journal. And I want to talk about how journaling comes in for me in regards to that practice. So you can see here, I want to cover this page over. So you can see here that I wrote down quotes from within the guidebook that I liked. That's my bullet point. And then I have a quote from the guidebook here I liked, I have a goddess that fell out of another deck while I was working with this daily draw, and I wrote down what I felt came through with that and how it tied into the guidebook meaning myself. And then I continued. I started of something that felt very important to me that I might want to come back to, and I continued. I had to write something work-wise here in this next page, but I continued going forward with what came up for me as I was sitting with the guidebook meanings. Why do it this way? That's what I would like to speak to, because I think this is really, I find this style of journaling, like this is bullet points to get to know a structure that I'm going to be working with as a reader. What I find very helpful for the style I just described, and I'm going to go over it again once I finish talking here, is that this helps me retain the card meaning by the author, because I've written down what the author is associating the card with. Then I personalize the experience by writing a little bit about what that brought up for me and what else happened in my experience for like while I was sitting and writing in this instance, but you could also work with what happened in your experience throughout the day that really anchored in personally how I experienced that card. Now, you can journal for 5 pages around that, or you can journal just a few sentences that way. How do you do that? Draw your card, sit with that for a few moments, sit with what comes up as you look at the imagery, as you look at the card title, any keywords or phrases, maybe the numbers on the card itself. Sit with what you feel, with what you hear, with what you know, with what you might be thinking while you look at the card. Then go to your journal. Write down a few things that came up intuitively for you. Then get out the guidebook. So as someone who I had to take copious notes in the religion I grew up in, my father liked us to do what we call personal study in the religion I grew up in. I was raised by Jehovah's Witnesses for the most part. We had to do something called personal study. So we would have to read out of these books every week. And we would then go to a meeting where we would kind of have to be able to either give some discourse or speak to what we had read. So we did a lot of note taking and highlighting, etc., for that type of situation. I grew up doing it. I grew up reading all the time, and I grew up taking notes, and I grew up doing public speaking. So what I can offer to you for some advice that I tend to do that's not helpful, so I'm always balancing it out for myself, is I will start reading the guidebook and then I'll start highlighting immediately or outlining as I'm going, and then I'm thinking and I'm trying to take notes at the same time. I've seen a lot of booktubers recommend this, and I actually find if you're wanting to get some, what I have found for myself is if I want to have something I'm really retaining from the information, I read the guidebook meaning through as a whole, like that whole guidebook meaning before I start highlighting, before I start taking notes. Then I give myself a few breaths to sit with like what really resonated there. And then I highlight that part in the book and I go to my journal and I write down what I want to retain, what I want to carry away from the guidebook around that card with. As you saw, I had that little bullet point mark, and then I wrote down the quote from the guidebook itself. Then I write, how did I feel it personally applies to me? And I might come back at the end of the day and further flesh out how that card applied to me as I move through the day. That allows me to retain the information that I'm meant to carry with me out of the guidebook. And I'm also building my own relationship with the card itself. So that is what I have found to be personally for me the most helpful in documenting. Outside of my card draw practice, I got super into BookTube this fall, and I got really into annotating, and that actually it took the joy of reading away from me. I ended up going too far off the deep end with it. So I've really been bringing it back to the process, the steps that work for me. And this is what works for me. So I do this now in my day. I mean, I've always done this in my daily card draws. That has been my practice for well over 2 decades now. No, 2 decades. Yeah, for 2 decades now. Oh my God, I'm 40. It's so weird to think of. But anyhow, that has been my practice in my card work for 2 decades now. But I've now brought that to my reading with books as well. In the past, I would just write down some quotations here and there in my journal that really stuck out to me. Then I went through my annotating craze in September and October, and it wasn't helpful. So if you find it to, if that's your sweet spot, then lean into it. If you find it to distract you from actually reading and retaining information, then I would encourage you to find that sweet spot in the middle. So what I'll do when it comes to my reading is write down the quotations here and there as I'm reading that speak to me, not on every page that I've read. And then at the end of the book, I'll write a few sentences down in my journal of things that impacted me from the reading. When I bring that to my daily card work, I follow the system I just spoke to. It's very easy. It's very simple. You can condense that down into a 5 to 10 minute experience with your cup of coffee or tea in the morning, or you can have a delicious, indulgent journaling session that lasts like 30 minutes. I love a good indulgent journaling session, and you can really go into what comes up for you with that guidebook meaning married to your intuition. But this is a system that I have found really works for me. And I didn't want to make another journaling video because I have so many journaling videos on the channel. Just do a little search on my page, on the channel page, and you will see there's loads, there's absolute oodles of journal information because I am a big proponent of journaling. I think it's huge for self-realization, for healing, for shadow work, and also for retaining and integrating what you are learning and experiencing on your path. Whether you are looking to have more of a spiritual path or you are following a pagan path, a left-hand path, a witchcraft path, or practice, and you want to document your journey, your experience, what you're learning, and how you're growing. Finding that balance in the daily draw between the guidebook and your intuition, there is something about writing it down that does seem to concretize that for the mind, at least for me. But there's also that sweet spot between I'm just literally writing out the guidebook meaning in my journal, and I'm actually writing in such a way that this is something that I'm going to remember, not just memorize. That's the difference. And this is the routine that I have found the most helpful for that. So again, draw the card, sit with what comes up intuitively for you, jot down a few words or a sentence or two about what comes up, go to the guidebook, read the guidebook meaning all the way through, highlight whatever you would like to have stand out for you when you draw the card again in the future. Go to your journal and write down how you feel that applies for you in this moment. And if it feels right for you at the end of the day or later on in the day, or if you have time in that moment, have a good journaling session where you talk about what comes up for you as you're sitting with that guidebook meaning. That's really going to help you retain the meaning of the card and then be able to go forward and use the card in spreads so that you don't have to reference your guidebook or your journal unless you want to. You'll know the cards well enough if you have a daily draw practice. You'll know the cards in that deck before you know it well enough that you can use the deck in readings and not have to constantly reference a guidebook. So this practice can be 5 to 10 minutes a day, or it can stretch out to as long of a journaling session as you would like it to. It does make a very big difference long term. And I am wishing you the most fun in creating this experience for yourself with your Oracle and your Tarot decks. It works across the board. So there's those two different styles. Bullet points, really quick, short and sweet for creating your own system with a deck that's separate to what the author or artist created. More in-depth journaling so that you can remember and connect with the artist and author's meanings and your own personalized meanings and experiences with the cards. I hope you find this video helpful. I am sending you guys, as always, oceans of love, and I will, of course, see you in the next video. Take care.